Hey guys, this is John from US Dash Camera. Today I got a review on the Discovery Adventures DC100. So this camera actually is from the Discovery Channel company, and it seems to be licensed in another country, and I'm not totally sure how those licenses work, but they're still able to sell it in the US under the Discovery Adventures brand. So right off the bat, I was pretty impressed with the packaging and also the camera, which we'll see in a second. But it does also use a Novatech 96655, which I believe is the exact same chipset in the Street Guardian SG9665 GC, and also the Sony IMX322 CMOS sensor. Now they claim it's a 16 megabit or megapixel camera, but I assume that just applies to pictures. In reality, for video, you're just going to be getting 2 megapixels or 1080p. But regardless, with this hardware, this camera should have decent quality footage. So you can see here on the back it does have many different languages, and it does say Discovery Communications. So it is supposedly an official Discovery Channel product, but it appears to be more an international product. So you likely wouldn't see this in US retail stores. But like I said, I was very impressed with the packaging. You open it up and there's a foam insert with a camera inside. It's pretty standard packaging for the inside. Everything's in plastic bags on the inside, so we'll just dump it all out right away. So I thought it was pretty interesting that Discovery is releasing dash cameras. Seems like a lot of different companies are now. So there is a warranty card. It's always nice to know that companies are backing up their products. Here's a manual. One thing I noticed right when I opened it is that there are some typos, like preface at the very top isn't capitalized. So while it is an official Discovery Communications or Discovery Adventures product, I find it a little odd that the manual wasn't checked over a little bit more. But overall, it seemed to be a pretty good manual. There's a quality certificate. And this mount is actually the exact same mount that comes with G1W. So that was one thing I was a little disappointed with, but here you can see it literally is the exact same mount. It is just a generic suction cup mount. There you can see all the little details even are the same. But I guess that's sort of expected. It's a $120 camera right now, so I would still consider this a pretty affordable camera. But that'll all depend on the video quality, of course. So what I really liked about this power cord is it actually has a USB port on it, so you can still charge a cell phone while this is plugged in. And it does even have a 90-degree angle, but there was a big issue with this plug-in, and we'll get to that in a second. So here's a data cable, which I personally never use. So I end up with so many different USB cables from all these different cameras I test. But anyways, let's go ahead and look at the actual camera now. I was really impressed with the actual camera. It seems very high quality, seems very sturdy. The material all feels really nice. It doesn't feel like they used any cheap materials at all, so I was very happy with how nice the camera felt. There are a lot of companies like HP or Philips that basically just license out their name to generic manufacturers that throw the name on to the camera, but I have pretty good impressions from this at first. On the side here we got the micro USB for power, an audio video out, and a reset button. Then on the other side we got the power button and the micro SD card slot. Now while I usually don't like shiny cameras, I do feel like the material actually looks really nice. The top also has a GPS input. At first I thought the lens could actually rotate, but It is very sturdy. You can't focus it or anything manually, of course. So here's the camera in the mount. I've mentioned many times before, I'm not a big fan of suction cup mounts, so I really wish they would use something a little better. But again, it's not a very expensive camera at $120. There's definitely more affordable options like the G1W, but it does have a few features that the G1W doesn't have, like the GPS option. So I wanted to compare this to the last camera I reviewed, the Ordro, and the Ordro is really small and also packs 1296p video recording, but both of them use that same style of suction cup mount that I'm not a big fan of. Now here I'm trying to plug it in, and I suddenly realize that the provided micro USB cable doesn't actually fit. So somehow this got past manufacturing, and because of how fat the plug-in is and the design of the camera, you can't push it in all the way. Now the manufacturer did comment and say they would be fixing the issue with a new mold for the plug-in. I'm not sure if they will be replacing customers' cables, but for now what I'm going to be using is this really old Galaxy Note 2 micro USB. Since it is just micro USB, as long as it fits, it'll work. So this one is a little bit thinner and seemed to fit the camera just fine, so that's what I'm going to be using for testing this. So right away that was sort of disappointing. I really hope the company will actually provide new power cables for anyone that buys this, because that is a big overlook for them to not realize that their own power cord doesn't fit. So let's go ahead and actually look at the camera's menu now. So the menu actually is the same menu style as the G1W, but the screen is actually pretty impressive. I was surprised at how high resolution it was. I feel like a lot of cameras with smaller screens like this have a really low resolution, but this one surprisingly looks very crisp, very smooth, and has a lot of the same menu options as the G1W, like resolution, the loop recording time. It does have wide dynamic range, exposure settings, motion detection settings. So all of these are pretty standard. So many cameras have this same menu style actually, that I actually get tired of going over them over and over again, because it's like I'm repeating myself. With a lot of these cameras manufactured in China, they have almost the exact same features or menu options. So while I felt like this camera does have a really nice build quality, especially the LCD, which seems much higher resolution than a lot of other cameras with screens about this size, it was a little surprising that it has the same generic operating system or menu as the G1W or a lot of other generic cameras. Now another thing I was surprised about is this camera actually has zoom. It is just a digital zoom, but if you use the up and down arrows, you can zoom in and out. So that was a little bit of a nice surprise, because I don't remember any other cameras I've tested that actually have a zoom, even though I personally don't think it's that useful. I've actually heard some people say they want that feature, so if that's something you wouldn't want, then this camera is something you might want to take a look at. But again, the rest of this menu is just like a lot of the other generic Chinese cameras, so I'm not going to cover every single menu option because it's pretty much the same thing that I'm saying over and over. So like most other cameras with screens, you can actually view your files. Now the bottom left button is the menu button, and if you hold that down for a few seconds, it'll switch modes. So here you can see I'm switching to the file viewing mode, and I can actually watch video files. So if you're on the road, got into an accident, and I don't want to give legal advice, but if you did want to show, say perhaps a police officer, what happened in a car accident, you'd be able to do that from the camera. A lot of people do want that feature, so I'm trying to make sure I show this in future videos also. Let's go ahead and take a look at some footage from the camera now though. Now the first thing you're going to notice is this footage is really bumpy. And that's because somehow I mounted it and I didn't tighten the ball and socket joint tight enough. So it was bouncing around, and that's sort of one of the things I don't like about mounts like this is you do have to tighten it, but they're plastic, so it's not like you can tighten them as hard as you can. You just got to be a little gentle, but make sure they're nice and tight without allowing any give or wiggle, but don't tighten it so much you're going to break it either. Now, one issue I did have with this camera though is the fact that with the mount that's provided, my Civic's window is a really low angle, and I've mentioned this in previous reviews, but I can't actually get it to look down at all. It's looking slightly above the horizon, which leaves a lot of sky in the picture. So if you have a really low angle window, such as a sports car or any of the newer Civics, you might have the same issue as me. Now, I had the same issue with my G1W, because it's the exact same mount, of course, but it is something to consider. Now, I do want to point out that this is actually the same chipset and the same CMOS sensor as the Street Guardian SG9665GC, which is what I normally use up front with my Blackview because it has such great video quality. Now, you would assume that this camera is going to also have just as good video quality, and it does actually have very good video quality, I would say, for a 1080p camera. The main difference between this and the Street Guardian, though, is the fact that with the mount, it's mounted quite a ways back from my windshield, and with the A118 or Street Guardian style form factor, those cameras have a lens right up against the glass, so there's going to be a lot less glare in the window, where here you can see my dashboards in the picture, and in some circumstances there's going to be a lot of glare on the glass too. So while this camera does have really nice specs, you do have to consider the actual form factor of the camera. Now here, this is going to be the only clip I actually have with audio. This is pretty common with a lot of the Novatech cameras, but there's always a beeping noise in the sound. As long as I've used dash cameras, all of the Novatech cameras have had that beeping sound, so it's a little annoying, but pretty much expected at this point. One thing I do like to test with dash cameras is how it performs when looking directly at the sun. And I would say this camera performs very well for its price point. One thing I look for is how much silhouetting there is, so when I was directly behind that white SUV, I want to see the actual color of the car or possibly the license plate. Now, in really harsh conditions like this, there's a good chance you're not going to be able to read the license plate because of the lighting, because it's just such harsh lighting conditions. But it's always a good idea to see how it performs in the harshest of conditions. A lot of people think nighttime is going to be the worst time or hardest time to read license plates, but I've always felt like looking directly into the sun is actually the hardest to make out any license plates or details in the picture. Now with the night footage, I feel like the level of brightness is really great. I drive this stretch of highway a lot of times when I'm testing night footage because oftentimes there's not a lot of street lights, or there's the city skyline in the background, and some cameras look really dark on this stretch of road, but this one looks very bright, looks very clear for the most part. But I would say, compared to the Street Guardian, it does seem a little blurrier, and I'm not really sure if that's because of how far back it's mounted from my windshield. So while I would say that the night footage is pretty good, it still seems a little blurry to me and out of focus. But at this point, I am just being a little nitpicky. I think overall, the night quality is very decent. It's better than most cameras I've tested, especially at this price point. My issue with the blurriness, or what appears to be out of focus, is possibly due to the fact that it's mounted quite a ways back, and my window or windshield has a very low angle, so you see a lot of windshield, you see the dashboard, so that could definitely play a factor. One thing I would point out though is the colors do really stand out on this camera. In the day or nighttime in conditions like this tunnel, I feel like the colors are really vibrant and very lifelike. So while I don't think this is the end all of dash cameras, it does have adequate footage and it's very affordable at $120 for the quality it gives. Now, while I do think the video quality is definitely worth noting, I gotta go back to the hardware issues. The fact that the power cord doesn't fit right out of the box is definitely an issue. Like I said, the company says they're going to fix it. I hope they're going to send out any people that have already bought it or buy it with the defective cord, new cords. So we'll see about that. Maybe they will comment down below. I actually tested multiple different micro USB cords, and the only one that fit was my Galaxy Notes USB cable because it had such a small, thin plug, or the plastic portion around the plug was so thin, and that was the only one that actually worked with it. So I don't think the company should expect people to go out and buy a Samsung Galaxy charging cable for this. And with how nice the actual camera feels, it feels so sturdy and such high quality, it's sort of jarring that it comes with such a generic suction cup mount. So the alternative to this though is they do have a DC200 model that uses mini USB, and as far as I know it doesn't have any issues with the power cord. It's pretty much the same power cord, except it's mini USB. But the DC200 has an A7 processor chipset and supports up to 1296p. So this camera, while it does have the very nice 96655 Novatech processor, it is a lower bitrate than the Street Guardian, which is a good reason likely as to why the video quality, at least to my eyes, doesn't seem to be up to par while still very good. It has about 11 to 12 megabits per second, where the Street Guardian has about 15 megabits per second, so it does make a small slight difference. Where the DC200, pictured here, uses the A7 processor up to 1296p, and while I haven't tested it, I feel like, based on my impressions on the specifications and the form factor of the camera, I would likely prefer the DC200 over the DC100, even though it's actually white, and I would typically prefer an all-black camera. So maybe I'm being a little unfair about my issue with the mount because I've used a lot of other cameras with similar style mounts, but I feel like the fact that the camera felt so nice, it disappointed me that the mount wasn't as nice as the rest of the product. But again, I'll leave links down below in the description to both of the models. I think they're worth checking out, but currently at this point, I would say hold off on the DC100 until we can confirm that the power cord included is actually fixed and works, or consider the DC200 instead because it has different hardware, and I personally feel like the form factor is a little more fitting for my tastes. So the company that manufactures this camera did send this to me for review, so I'd like to thank them for sending this to me for review. I think it has promise. Like I said, there were some issues with it that I found, and they have told me that they're going to fix these issues, so I'll keep you guys posted on any updates I get regarding those issues. And as usual, if you like this video or my other videos, I'd appreciate it if you hit like and subscribe. Drive safe, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.